I have spent 81 cycles working for the Galactic Classification Bureau, and I want to be very clear about something before I tell you this story. I am not a dramatic being. I do not exaggerate. I do not embellish. My species, the Vethrani, are physiologically incapable of panic. Our threat response system routes all fear signals through the precognitive reasoning cortex before they can manifest as behavior. Which means that when I tell you I stood in the viewing galleries of the Orinthian Arena and felt something cold and ancient crawl through my nervous system, you should understand that this was not an overreaction. It was the most accurate response I have ever had to anything. But let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is important. The beginning is where the mistake happened, and mistakes like this deserve to be examined closely so that future generations of bureaucrats can look back and understand exactly where, how, and why everything went catastrophically, unforgettably wrong. The Galactic Classification Bureau operates out of a building that cost 11 billion credits to construct and communicates this expense through every surface it owns. The floors are polished Vethrite stone. The ceilings arch like cathedrals. The lighting was designed by an award-winning illumination artist who charged more per fixture than most colony ships cost to fuel. It is, in short, the kind of building that only governments can afford, and only governments would waste money on, and it tells you everything you need to know about the institution operating inside it. Director Solvax presided over the human certification ceremony with the particular satisfaction of a man who has never once been wrong and never once been right, but has always been entirely convinced of the difference. He was Pelthorin, which meant he stood at roughly half my height, possessed 4 independently mobile eye clusters, and had the kind of confidence that only comes from never having survived anything genuinely dangerous. His species had evolved on a world without predators. This is relevant. This matters. "We are pleased to present," Solvax announced, his voice amplified through the chamber's resonance system to an unnecessary degree, "the official classification assessment for the human species, origin world Earth. Current representative, Dr. Mara Voss, geological survey specialist, visiting the Council on behalf of Earth's Intraplanetary Research Consortium." Dr. Mara Voss stood on the certification platform looking like someone had assembled a person from the most ordinary components available. Medium height by her species standards, brown hair pulled back in a practical knot, clothing that suggested function over formality. Her hands were, I noticed, slightly calloused, field researcher hands, the kind that have spent time gripping tools and climbing surfaces and doing physical work in environments that did not care about her comfort. She looked around the ceremony hall with the expression of someone who was politely impressed, but also quietly cataloging everything. The exits, the sightlines, the distances between objects. I noticed this because I was watching carefully. I notice things when bureaucrats don't. Solvax continued reading from his assessment tablet with the tone of a person reciting a particularly pleasing report card. The Bureau had tested Mara Voss according to Full Category Assessment Protocol 7, the standard battery applied to any new species seeking unrestricted Council travel clearance. Strength assessment, average relative to body mass. Reflex calibration, within expected parameters for a species of her size. Neurological threat markers, no elevated aggression signatures detected. Chemical analysis, no venom production, no toxin secretion, no biological weaponry of any kind. Psychic evaluation, minimal to non-existent. Energy projection, 0 recorded output. It is therefore the Bureau's determination, Solvax concluded, beaming like he had personally solved something difficult, that the human species presents no significant threat profile to Council members, affiliated species, or galactic stability. We are proud to assign the human species classification category 6, passive non-threatening, suitable for unrestricted travel, commercial exchange, and open diplomatic engagement. Category 6. Let me explain what that means in our system.
Category 1 is reserved for species that have ended wars by showing up. Category 2 includes species that have ended wars by being involved in them. Category 3 covers species that could end wars if sufficiently motivated. Category 4 is beings that present significant danger in direct conflict. Category 5 is species that are dangerous in specific contexts or circumstances. Category 6 is the category that contains creatures the Council considers essentially harmless, decorative even, the kind of species you pat on the head and assign to cultural exchange programs. The gathered officials applauded. Deputy Director Corinth, a being so thoroughly committed to procedure that he had once filed a complaint about an improperly formatted congratulatory memo, nodded with profound approval. 3 visiting dignitaries from the Hessian Trade Consortium murmured appreciatively. The certification plaque was presented. Mara Voss accepted it with a polite smile and said, "Thank you, this is a beautiful plaque. Whoever does your engraving is very talented." Several people chuckled warmly. "See," they said to each other with their collective body language, "harmless, grateful, friendly, exactly as assessed." I was watching her eyes, the same eyes that had cataloged the room when she entered. She was looking at the plaque the way someone looks at a thing they find gently amusing. Not disrespectful, not contemptuous, just quietly aware of something the rest of the room wasn't. The post-ceremony social period included refreshments, diplomatic mingling, and the optional combat verification arena, which sits adjacent to the Bureau's main complex for reasons that have always seemed philosophically inconsistent with a classification institution. The idea, supposedly, is cultural exchange. New species can observe and participate in traditional combat sports practiced throughout the Council, demonstrating capabilities in a controlled and voluntary setting. In practice, it is where newly classified species occasionally make fools of themselves for the entertainment of established Council members, and where the arena's permanent staff remind everyone why Category 1 classifications exist. Most of the day's newly classified species declined the arena option. A representative from the Felvery Collective, a gaseous organism with no physical combat ability whatsoever, was physically incapable of entering a gravity-regulated space. The Blinthian mineral entity expressed polite disinterest. A Choran symbiotic cluster had philosophical objections. Mara Voss, who had been standing near the refreshment table drinking something and looking at a Bureau architectural diagram posted on the wall, raised her hand. "I'd like to try the arena," she said, "if that's allowed." The pause that followed was the kind that starts polite and becomes something else. Arena Captain Drevin, a 4-armed Cerethian with championship credentials and the physical presence of a geological formation, looked at Mara Voss the way you look at someone who has just said something that doesn't quite parse. Then he smiled. It was a very large smile. "The arena," he said, spreading his arms in the welcoming gesture of someone who has already won, "welcomes all." What followed should have been a brief and educational demonstration of why classification categories exist. Drevin selected 3 junior competitors from his training program, a young Chelfian barely past her adolescent molting phase, a Burvani male whose primary skills were administrative, and a Granix whose species was known more for agricultural output than combat excellence. These were not fighters. They were warm bodies in training gear, assembled to make the experience feel participatory without risking anything complicated. Mara walked onto the arena floor, noted the dimensions with what looked like a quick mental calculation, and asked if she could have a moment to stretch. She was given a moment. She used it efficiently. Neck, shoulders, hips, ankles. Practical and unhurried. The match began. The Chelfian came in first, running a standard pressure approach. Mara stepped aside. The Chelfian's momentum carried her past the space Mara had occupied, and before she could recover, Mara was already 3 meters in a different direction. No strike, no engagement, just absence, clean and deliberate. The Burvani tried a flanking approach. Mara watched him coming with her peripheral vision, adjusted her position, and when he committed to his reach, she wasn't there. He grabbed empty air.
His own reaching posture left him leaning forward, weight distributed wrong, and a single flat palm against his shoulder turned his stumble into a controlled sit-down. "Not a hit," someone in the gallery observed. "She pushed him." "She used his weight," someone else corrected. Their voice had lost the casual amusement from 30 seconds earlier. The Granix, the most physically substantial of the three, came at Mara with a committed charge. She ran toward him, which seemed insane, and then at the last moment dropped to one knee and drove her shoulder into his lower legs rather than his body. The angle was precise. The Granix went over her like a wave over a rock and landed hard, rolling, disoriented. She was already standing before he processed what had happened. 3 opponents, no hits received. Total engagement time, 6 minutes, 14 seconds. The gallery was quiet. Drevin, who had been leaning against the arena wall with the comfortable posture of someone watching a formality, was no longer leaning. He was standing straight, all forearms held slightly away from his body in the Cerethian posture I recognized as recalibration, reassessment. "Shall we conclude?" a bureau official began over the arena communication system. "Is there another round?" Mara asked. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. She was scanning the arena floor like she was calculating something. In the viewing boxes, Solvox was scrolling through his assessment files with increasing urgency. "The reflex scores were average," he said to no one in particular, his voice strained. "The strength measurements were unremarkable. The response time was within normal parameters." "What she's demonstrating isn't strength or reflex speed," I said. He looked at me like he'd forgotten I was there. "It's spatial awareness and positioning. That's not something your battery tests for." "Our battery tests cover all relevant threat indicators." "Does it?" I said, and watched the arena floor where Mara Voss was waiting for whatever came next with the particular patience of a person who is very comfortable waiting. That was when Gorith the Immovable walked through the competitor's gate. The arena went still in the way that arenas go still when something genuinely significant enters the space. Gorith was Cerethian like Drevin, but where Drevin was impressive, Gorith was architectural. 2.5 meters of layered armor plating, natural carapace reinforced by centuries of selective evolution, 4 limbs built for leverage and impact, and a combat record spanning 9 unbroken championship cycles. Gorith had never lost. The name was not ceremonial, it was descriptive. Gorith looked across the arena at Mara Voss. Mara looked back at Gorith. "I'll take this one personally," Gorith said. The voice was like a structural settling sound, deep and absolute. Mara nodded once. "Okay," she said, and rolled her shoulders. The betting boards lit up across the gallery with numbers that would have been offensive to describe as odds. They were closer to a geological certainty. They were the numerical equivalent of pointing at the horizon and calling it a prediction. I watched Mara Voss study Gorith across the arena floor, and I noticed something that none of the assessors had thought to test for, something no standard battery had a checkbox for. She was not afraid. Not performing bravery, not suppressing fear, not managing it. She simply didn't appear to have the version of threat response that made you want to be somewhere else. She was present, focused, and appeared to be treating this as an interesting problem, which, as I was about to learn, was very nearly the most dangerous in the known galaxy. The match began without ceremony. Gorith charged with the directness of a being that has won 237 consecutive arena matches and no longer needs to be subtle about it. The force behind that charge had once collapsed a reinforced training barrier during a demonstration. Gorith was not a fighter who relied on technique. Gorith was a fighter who relied on the fundamental physical reality that mass, velocity, and armor density, when combined, do not leave room for negotiation. Mara ran sideways, not away, not back, perpendicular to the charge, cutting across the arena floor at an angle that forced Gorith to adjust trajectory mid-momentum. Gorith adjusted. Gorith was experienced enough to adjust, but adjustment costs a fraction of a second, and Mara was already adjusting to Gorith's adjustment, reading the correction before it fully committed. She changed direction again with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent years navigating terrain that didn't cooperate. The charge clipped empty air. In the gallery, the silence had a texture to it, a density. It was the silence of a large number of people deciding not to voice what they were thinking yet, because voicing it would make it real. Goreth reset, turned, processed. The armor plating along Goreth's shoulders shifted in what I recognized as the Cerethian combat calibration posture, the unconscious adjustment that happens when an opponent has earned a second look. The second charge was slower, more controlled, designed to herd rather than destroy. Goreth angled to pun off the sideways escape route. 3 meters between them. 2. Mara dropped to the arena floor, flat, and rolled under Goreth's reaching arms. She came up inside Goreth's guard and shoved with both hands against the junction point between 2 armor plates, a gap in the carapace that was structurally necessary and therefore unavoidably present. It wasn't a strike designed to damage, it was a push designed to interrupt balance. Goreth stumbled half a step, just half. But in combat, half a step is a revision of the entire architecture of a moment. Mara was already somewhere else, putting distance between them, breathing steadily through her nose. The gallery had been expecting a short match. It was getting a long one. And something about that fact was beginning to move through the assembled crowd like a current through water. The species representatives from 42 worlds had all done enough threat analysis in their lifetimes to understand that duration and a mismatch only favors one side. The question was which side, and the answer to that question was slowly, inexorably becoming clear. Goreth committed to a sustained assault, attack patterns layered and overlapping, drawing on 9 championship cycles of refined technique. The crowd recognized the sequences. They had watched Goreth deploy them against opponents who were genuinely dangerous, against beings who were faster or stronger or more experienced than Maravas by any metric the standard assessment battery would measure. Mara was never where the attacks landed. This sounds simple. It was not simple. It was a form of spatial intelligence operating at a speed and precision that had no corresponding category in our classification documentation because no one had thought to create one. She read the commitment point of each strike before it completed, identified the space it would occupy, and vacated that space with the minimum movement necessary. No dramatics, no flourishes, just continuous, exhausting, methodical not being there. 10 minutes. Goreth was not tired at 10 minutes. A Cerethian physique at championship condition operates at peak output for well over an hour. I had watched Goreth fight 40-minute matches without visible fatigue. 10 minutes was nothing. But Goreth was also not landing hits, and not landing hits against a moving opponent requires constant recalibration, constant exertion, constant output, and the Cerethian physiology, optimized for explosive, powerful engagement, was burning fuel it was designed to burn in shorter windows. Mara, meanwhile, was running. Not sprinting. Not performing. Moving. Constant low-impact repositioning, keeping her cardiovascular system in the range that her biological data, which I was now reading on my personal tablet with the focused attention of someone who should have read it earlier, described as her aerobic zone, a range for species could maintain for hours. 15 minutes. Goreth's armor plating was radiating heat. The Cerethian cooling system, vents distributed across the dorsal carapace, had kicked into active mode. This was normal for intense combat engagement. What was less normal was how early it had activated. Mira had found a piece of training equipment on the arena perimeter, a weighted practice post used for impact calibration drills. She picked it up. Not to use it as a weapon, she was holding it extended in front of her, adding resistance to her movement, working her muscles at a slightly higher load, keeping herself warm, staying functional. The crowd saw this, and a sound went through the gallery that was not quite any recognizable emotional response. It was the sound of understanding arriving at a speed people weren't prepared for. She was training while fighting. 20 minutes. Goreth was on one knee, not due to any strike, not due to injury, due to the simple, brutal mathematics of a body designed for short explosive output being asked to perform continuous high-intensity activity against an opponent that would not stop moving, would not engage at close range long enough to be caught, would not tire, would not panic, and would not stop. The arena medical team moved to the edge of the floor. "Which competitor?" the medical coordinator asked over the internal channel. The confusion in their voice was audible. Drevin, who had been watching with the stillness of a being in the process of fundamentally revising something, said quietly, "Stand by." 23 minutes. Gorith's arms were braced against the arena floor. The breathing was audible from the gallery. Steam rose from the carapace fence in visible plumes. The 9-time champion, the immovable, was overheating. Mara Voss walked to the arena perimeter, picked up one of the water containers she'd left there before the match started, and drank. Then she turned and looked at Gorith with an expression that was entirely without malice, entirely without triumph, and completely unreadable. She walked back to the center of the floor and stood. She was waiting. The word persistence hunting exists in Earth's biological history files under a section that Bureau assessors had flagged as ecological trivia and skipped during their evaluation process. I was reading it now. My hands were doing something that Vethrani hands do not do, a fine tremor that bypassed my precognitive reasoning cortex entirely, which had never happened to me before in 81 cycles. The definition was concise. A hunting strategy in which the predator pursues prey continuously over long distances, not with superior speed, but with superior endurance, until the prey overheats, collapses, and can no longer function. The humans had used this method to hunt animals larger than themselves, faster than themselves, physically more dangerous than themselves. They had done this before they had advanced tools, before they had organized armies, before they had anything except the biological capacity to keep going long after every other species would have stopped. The Bureau had given Mara Voss a Category 6 classification, passive non-threatening. They had not tested her endurance. They had not tested her patience. They had not tested what happened when she decided she was not finished yet. Gorith rose, slowly, with the terrible pride of a being who has built an identity on invincibility. Gorith rose and faced Mara across the arena floor. The posture was not aggressive, it was honest. "What are you?" Gorith said. It was not entirely a question. "Tired," Mara said, "but fine." The pause lasted 4 seconds. Gorith raised one arm in the Cerethian gesture of formal concession. The arena was silent for a long moment. Then a single voice somewhere in the upper gallery said, in a tone that had evacuated all humor, "Category 6. The medical team moved onto the floor. Gorith accepted their assistance. Mara drank more water. The collapse of Director Solvax's professional composure happened in stages, like a structural failure that begins in one load-bearing wall and propagates outward. First, the color change, Pelthorin skin cycling through its entire stress response spectrum. Then the frantic tablet scrolling. Then the sharp whispered consultation with Deputy Director Coranth. Then the abandoned whisper as the stakes of performance became irrelevant. "She needs to be reclassified immediately," Solvax said. His voice had the quality of someone reading from a script they had not expected to need. "On what grounds specifically?" I asked. I had moved down to the arena level at this point. Someone needed to be there. "On the grounds that her demonstrated capabilities are wildly inconsistent with Category 6 designation. She followed every rule, participated voluntarily, used no weapons, inflicted no injuries." I paused. The arena assessment was conducted correctly. The outcome is the outcome. "The outcome," Solvax said, "is that a civilian researcher with no combat training defeated Gorith the Immovable." "That is accurate, yes." "Then we have a problem." I looked out at the arena floor where Mara Voss was sitting on a practice bench, doing what appeared to be notes in a small physical notebook. Actual paper. She had carried a paper notebook to her classification ceremony. "May I ask," I said, approaching her, "what you're writing?" She looked up. "Observations. The arena floor composite has an interesting silicate structure, different from what we use in earth construction. I want to look it up when I get back to my quarters." She paused. "Is everything okay? People seem upset." "You defeated the arena champion." "I outlasted him," she said, with the precise accuracy of a scientist correcting a methodological imprecision. "That's different. He's very strong. I just kept moving." "Where did you learn to do that?" "Field research. I work on planetary surfaces in variable gravity and unstable terrain. You develop situational awareness or you get hurt." She closed her notebook. "I also hiked competitively for about 6 years, long distance. My best was a 48-hour continuous trail run." She said this the way someone mentions a weekend hobby. I stood very still. "You ran," I said carefully, "for 48 hours. Continuously. Resting is allowed, but it counts against your time, so most serious runners minimize it." She tilted her head. "Is that relevant?" Behind me, I heard Corinth make a sound that was not a word. Solvax was messaging someone with the frantic energy of a being who has realized they need to be messaging everyone: their supervisor, their supervisor's supervisor, the emergency council coordination office, possibly their personal legal representation. "Representative Voss," Solvax said, approaching with the stiff dignity of a man walking towards something he would rather walk away from. "The Bureau will need to conduct supplementary assessment procedures. Given what we observed today, your species classification is under urgent review." Mara considered this. "Of course, whatever's helpful." She glanced at the certification plaque still tucked under her arm. "Should I return this?" "No, that is, the plaque is—" Solvax stopped. "Keep the plaque. It really is nice work. I was going to ask about the engraving process. I'm curious whether it's machine cut or artisanal." Nobody answered. The supplementary assessment conversation had derailed into a question about engraving, and somehow that was the most destabilizing detail of the afternoon. Here was a being who had just ended the career of an undefeated champion, asking about artisanal engraving techniques, and the question was entirely sincere. Gorith, assisted by the medical team but walking independently, passed Mara on his way out. He stopped, looked down at her for a long moment, 9 championship cycles and 237 victories weighing something in his expression. "Your species," he said, "is not what the files say." "We're geologists, mostly," Mara said, "and biologists, some engineers." She thought about it. "We have soldiers, too, obviously, but I don't really know any personally." The sound Gorith made was not laughter. It was something that had started as laughter and been converted into something else by circumstance. The Emergency Council reclassification session convened before the first cycle rotation completed. 44 member species represented, every available seat occupied, the atmosphere carrying the particular charge of a body that has made a significant error and is determining how to distribute responsibility for it. The vote required almost no deliberation. Category 1. Maximum Evaluation Status. All Human Council access suspended pending comprehensive military capability assessment, diplomatic protocol review, and a fundamental reconstruction of the classification battery that had apparently been missing several relevant questions for the entirety of its operational existence. Solvax resigned before the session concluded. Corinth was placed under administrative review. The entire Category Assessment Protocol 7 framework was suspended for emergency audit. Mara Voss was, at that moment, in her bureau guest quarters, reviewing xenogeological survey data and apparently unaware that she had triggered the largest administrative crisis in Council history. I know this because I checked, because someone needed to document this accurately for the record.
I also know that when the reclassification notification was delivered to her quarters, her response, per the delivery official's report, was as follows. "Oh, is there something I should have done differently?" The delivery official did not know how to answer that. I wrote in my assessment notes that evening in the section reserved for supplementary observations. The Bureau tested strength, reflex, aggression, chemical output, and psychic potential. It did not test patience. It did not test endurance. It did not test what a species does when it decides it is not finished yet. These omissions represent a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes something dangerous. We looked for claws, we looked for venom, we looked for explosive capability. We did not look for the thing that hunted predators across open ground until the predators stopped. We should have looked for that. We will look for that now. Category 6. Passive non-threatening. The plaque still said so, beautifully engraved. Mara Voss kept it on her desk for the remainder of her stay, which she spent conducting her geological survey work and asking thoughtful questions about silicate composition and igneous formations. She was, as far as I could determine, entirely harmless. She was also something the galaxy had not seen before and would not forget. The two things, it turned out, were not the same.